okay, what is revolutionary? This, what you have been watching, that is revolutionary. This is what our inheritance should have been. This is the model upon which our life should have been built. But the ruling class took that away.
I would just like to add um, on this note that it really showcases the ideological confusion, the ideological insincerity when this person from Platypus, asked that, like he suggested that Paul Robeson needed the Communist Party and not the other way around. That the Communist Party did not need Paul Robeson. That without the Communist Party, that there would be no Paul Robeson. Now that ties into what Pura was saying when you have the Paul Robeson model of thinking and you go from the bottom up rather than looking from top down. When you look top down, that's what you think. That's what you think that, oh, Paul Robeson needed the Communist Party. Whereas that is absolutely on its head, as Purva said. When you don't look at it from that perspective, everything becomes confusing. When you look top down, the tree looks like a straight line. When you look from the bottom up, you'll see all the branches. Yeah, that's just what I wanted to add.
Yeah, I found the questions really interesting because also after the first question, that really was not a question, it was a statement, like cloaked as a question about Islanda Robeson. Oh, but what about Islanda? Like we heard, like it's like she said it. She was like, we hear a lot about male revolutionaries, but what about their wives? She said that. And so it was a statement. It's not a question. But then there was immediately after, you actually had an older Black gentleman who, what he immediately wanted to say was, thank you. The difference to me was really stark, where he was like, he's like, oh, I actually don't have a question. I just want to say thank you. He's like, I just want to say thank you because this was such an important event. And then he was like, yeah, you reminded me that, I think he was like, yeah, actually, this is where Robeson spoke at this place. And so it's hallowed grounds. He was like, this is hallowed grounds. This is like, these are how do you describe hallowed? Like, yeah, these are like basically, in some ways, these are religious grounds, like precious grounds where a hero once walked. And what he was also saying was, he was like, we as a people of Chicago, we're part of this history. We carry something. And like, and he was basically like, thank you for reminding everyone, showing everyone of what we've always had and we need to carry forward. And yeah, and then you had the question from the person from PSL and the question from the Chinese young gentleman from Platypus. And to me, it really showed, I was just like, yeah, this is in some ways a conversation we've been having for a few months now, which is, I really feel like there is a crisis of universities. There's a crisis of people who go to universities and you end up basically being like, you take and I don't know if it's a collusion of professors and organizations that are recruiting from college campuses or what, but it is essentially, whether you want to call it Trotskyism or what, there's a white supremacist notion being taught, which tells you that like Black people, like you said, Black people are victims. They don't contribute to scientific human achievements. They have not, and that they don't carry authority. Like, I think that's a fact, actually. Because I just remember, and like, I also remember like in free school, we had this conversation once about Lenin and Du Bois, but that people even said, like, I think it was Brandon who was like, oh yeah, I'll never forget when Ho Chi Minh said that he cried when he saw that Lenin said, what I'm realizing is that like we have to address the colonial thesis. To say basically this thing of, if like, similar to how Robeson was like, I come from the standpoint of the people and human freedom, and that has driven me to realize like that I will never go against the Soviet Union. I will never go against the anti-colonial movements. I will never go against the Bandung conference. But instead, it's the opposite. It's showing me that these anti-colonial movements, hand in hand with the Soviet Union and a burgeoning socialist movement, whatever you want to call it, that this is the future. This is showing a birth of a new humanity, one that can be free. Like similar to that, it's like I feel like that is the Lenin that people also forget. The Lenin that was like, oh yeah, I am the father of the Russian Revolution, like this father of the Russian Revolution, who saw in the future, who saw when he saw the future, he saw the anti-colonial movements, and yeah, it's just showing. I feel like it was to me. I was looking because all those young people asking those questions. I was like, yeah, you're pretty familiar to me actually, because I went to Cornell, and I think looking, and in some ways, it made me. It's all of this has made me really reflect on my own experience, because I don't really think I completely understood what was going on when I was witnessing certain things happening at Cornell. And I just think there's something really even deeply, I think there's something really sinister about prestigious universities and cities in particular. Big cities with political forces, histories of political forces, counter-revolutionary forces. And yeah, and I just think to myself, like, I remember when I was at Cornell, the thing that really changed my life, and I wonder if other people felt it too, is when we read Grace Lee Boggs. And she basically was like, it's Grace Lee Boggs writing in her autobiography. Because I read her being excited that I was like, oh, it's an Asian woman who ended up in the Black movement. And then when Grace Lee Boggs said, she was like when she said, she was like, I realized that Jimmy Boggs and these Black factory workers showed me more about revolution than CLR James, like basically the whole Trotskyist socialist movement. She was like, I got something, like Jimmy taught me that you can find something in the poetry of Countee Cullen that you can't find like in the, basically, I guess, what her perception of the left, or even though she was in the left. But yeah, but then also the way she was like, it's her writing her autobiography at the end of her life, where she said, she was like, you need to, most of her book is focused on King and the civil rights movement. And there's a primary chapter at the heart of her autobiography that says, from protest to revolution, where she basically explains what's wrong with simply like this left notion of like protest is enough in and of itself. And she basically makes the argument for ideological struggle and how King, nonviolence, was this philosophic invention, scientific invention that like is necessary for the future America. But anyways, this is me also reflecting out loud right now, just saying that I was trying to think about myself like in university and just being like, yeah, it's so different. Like I think young people, like it's sad that I think young people really seek out a real education. That's the whole point of going to college. You're supposed to actually get the tools to understand yourself in the world, through the world. And I think there's something really wrong with when kids go to college now.
Yeah, actually, what you said makes me think a lot about the university, because there's essentially two assumptions for people who go into these universities and come out. One is the arrogance, the belief that you come out of these universities knowing everything, when in fact you don't. Instead, you're taught the opposite. And then two is also like removal from actual ordinary like human beings. And that really stunts people's growth, like during coming out. And it was shown in the event. I was gonna say this weekend, but it's weekend right now. But this event on Thursday, because one, it's like instead of actually engaging with what we were saying, it was, oh wait, actually no, I already know. Like I come in already knowing everything, and therefore it's not to like, oh, like what was actually being taught, like how can I learn, how do I actually engage, but instead it's to put down or to be like, oh no, like you guys don't know, I know. And then the other piece is like the unhuman, like the lack of like human, like just natural human being like qualities, which is like the excitement and like to be in a room, like the ideas, but also the ideas in living in practice of like the people who you're next to, like how are they responding, how like listening to where they're coming from as well. But there's a removal because when you're in school, you're taught to, or like everything around you removes you from actual regular, like ordinary human beings. And what Doc, you were saying earlier, of like, yeah, like it is reflective that ordinary people are here, but the so-called like movements or like leaders, blah blah blah, aren't. Um, and it actually, I think, makes me think about when we had the event on Du Bois and Black Reconstruction, where someone asked like the same question. It's like, you know, these similar threads of thought of like, oh, what do we do now? Like, and there is something where when you have these two assumptions of knowing everything and having been removed, if it's actually a genuine question, then the path is to actually go to ordinary people and to learn and to humble yourself and learn from them. But because what was also apparent is that what we're saying is that whereas like either acknowledging or knowing that they come in bad faith, but even if that question was genuine, like we saw the response, which is like, what do you do after a conference like this? People are excited, people want to talk about it. And then this is like back to what your doc you were saying, which is like people know what they have to do. It's through an event like this to say like what they imagine or aspire to is possible. And like what does it mean when you have someone like Robeson who is courageous? It enables you to also be courageous and take courageous stances in your life. And through that, you engage with other people around you and you talk about these ideas and how these play out, and yeah, and how you live your day to day, how you organize, how you come together. And that's also like, and that's also like I think the first time some of us who like came from this academic or elite background encountered it, we were like, oh wait, that looks familiar, but it's also kind of jarring. And then now, like as a couple of us have been through events where like these same questions come up from the same kinds of people,
Yeah.
you start to recognize it. Like Mr. Barto was like, you know, the last time we didn't know, and then now we're like, oh wait, that's the same thing. I know you. um, and uh, I guess I say this to say like, yeah, it's the like I think we'll continue to see these questions again, but it also reinforces how there's this parallel and divergent path, which is that we're taking.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to say that I like what you guys are saying because it's also clarifying for me, and I agree. And I also like what you said, Doc, about how it's important to state that the people of Platypus, like these young people of Platypus and groups like PSL, they are responsible. I mean, I don't give them a pass either, and I've never given them a pass like that because I saw how hostile things were. Like you said, Emily, an elite university in a city like Philadelphia, where I basically see it as a parallel where what Platypus and what PSL pushes is earnest at best, but grotesque when in the presence of an ideologically clear and like truthful alternative, which is what's happening. Like when you describe, Doc, about the stand that they take on Paul Robeson through Norman Finkelstein instead of like actually accepting or taking Paul Robeson as he is, and instead taking a very like Frankenstein distorted, like white supremacist understanding of him. Cause yeah, well, I was gonna say something about Penn or like, oh yeah, because I think what's hard about like the elite university in the city is that you're dropped in a place where certain contradictions or certain truths or like the crisis of America is very plain to see, and thus you're also faced with a moral choice, like to be at the very least acknowledged, but eventually to be made. And everything about that elite environment is going to push you in the opposite direction. So what choice are you going to make?
And it's basically an environment where you can't run away from the fact that you are responsible. So yeah, that's how I see these PSL and these platypus people also, because even though some of them might be young, like Fred Hampton was also very young when he was in the Black Panther Party, and he was on the completely right side because he had to, because of the way that history was changing. It was his moral responsibility. Um, yeah, I think there's something else I was gonna say, but it's slipping my mind right now. But yeah, I just like what you said, Emily, because I think it's very true. Like how much more sinister the agenda of the elite university becomes, especially when you put it into a context where you are going to see like poverty, you're going to see deindustrialization, like you're going to see the color line, and that like the ideology of the university is going to push you away from that. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, because the okay, because it's basically what it does, and this is something like Magna says in her dissertation too, approves with data, but it's basically you're taught to look down upon the world. You're taught to look down upon the mass of humanity, which is ordinary people. And it's the opposite of what Harold Washington said in that quote, where he was like, the greatest teacher I have is the men, women, and children of the city who, and same with Robeson, where Robeson, it was like the more access he had to the world because of money or fame, the more he was like, oh, wow, like what gives me life and purpose and what I'm loyal to is, and what I am so eager to study. Like in some ways, he wrote for Robeson, he was like, my teacher in life are my people and the world's people, which are interlinked. And in your ton, the university is the opposite. Because again, like my friend Barbara, she said something really striking to me, which was, she was like, my dad was a janitor at U Chicago and I hate this place. She was like, I hate this fucking place because my dad was a janitor here for a decade and they treated him like shit. And she never forgot that. And like that's that's like U Chicago, University of Pennsylvania. It's like you said, like it's a place where it's almost like it's like the pressure cooker aspect of it is amplified, because if you're a young person on this campus, you can't ignore the fact that you're at the center of wealth and power, and just like a few feet across the street is the ghetto, and you're being taught to look down on them. And I think that is my point, is that that's part of the ideology that is inherent in prestigious universities like this. And it's doing something, and it's sad because nowadays, I forget who said, oh, you did, Doc, in your presentation, you were like, you asked the question of, okay, well, we now can go to any university, like hypothetically we can go to any university we want now, but there's still war, we're still broke, the community's broken, like, and like that's the, and I also feel like that's why free school, what we do is so important, but it's also why I think free school in this city is, we face so much we face so much shit because we've hit something so right that the push that we have to be pushed back upon. And yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
okay. I'm just going to add quickly. Okay, yes, because this. Okay, what you helped me complete my thought, which is that I can't absolve these ideas that are being pushed in the platypus or PSL, because I see what it produces at an event like this, where if you only have 5 minutes for question, then there's a certain chance to expand or develop knowledge, or yeah, a certain chance to discover something, and instead it's interrupted. Like it's artificially interrupted by this BS that doesn't come at all from the same direction the event is going in. And it's the same thing with the university, where like I can't absolve the ideology of any type of elite American university at this time, because I also see what it produces in a city like Philadelphia, the types of institutions, the type of knowledge, like the way it distorts and pretty much like breaks young people, and the way that it like heightens and worsens a lot of the social relationships in Philadelphia, and also makes it harder for something like preschool to exist. So That's all. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that this conversation is making me think back over I think some of the aspects of the panel discussion also, and this thing Emily was saying that we in free school have really hit something which has been which has been erased, which has been uh, suppressed for a while. And I was thinking in terms of, I think Doc, it was you who mentioned in the panel discussion about like you know I think it was about when we think, when this question of the frame of thought that Robson and really all these people, the revolutionary frame of thought, all of them, the central anchor that they were talking about was the question of the future. And I think in terms of this question that we've been talking about Robson as the scientist, but also uh, in some sense the scientific project of what we are trying to do. And I really appreciated what the part that Serafina read out from Galileo, that this question that Dubois is talking about is that science has been separated from the question of humanity. And I think what he's saying is that science has been separated from the question of future. And it's when we talk about the question of future in terms of humanity and also in terms of knowledge. I mean, that's what we have been talking about all this while. When we read Hegel, we are concerned about the human capacity and the human capacity to know, for knowledge. And when we are talking about the this frame of thought from which we are operating, or what we're really trying to understand and embody in our lives, is the fact that science and the question of and the question of human freedom is not ever separated from the question of future. And this is the distortion that leads to these completely wrong conclusions, that the platypus conclusions, or basically the whole Trotskyite assumption about, oh, there having to be a perfect revolution, because what you're concerned about is your perfection. You're not concerned about the future. And this is, I think this is one of the things that we're trying to do, that when we have when we talk about why these these why the conclusions that so many on the left are falling prey to, and the question of universities, because universities have completely fallen prey to the assumption that there is no future to be worked upon. And that's because they're ruled by what they do not believe in future. And I think this is I think this is an important part of the history of scientific movement. It has always been concerned about the future of human knowledge, of human capacity. And once we reject that assumption, once we reject that as the central anchor from which we operate, we are bound to come across these completely injustifiable assumptions. All of the things that we are talking about uh, yeah, we are trying to understand, so many on the left, they're trying to understand, oh, which is the the right path to revolution, or what is the future of communism today. I mean, this is the question everybody on the left is concerned about. What's the future of socialism? But
What is the future of
that's a complete distortion, because you're not invested in the future of humanity. And this also shows how the it completely distorts the thought and personality of all these people. They're coming across this as and this is a wall that you run into. There's no way that you're coming out from it unless you reject the basic assumption from which you are operating. And I think this was very clarifying when I think you were talking about that it has to be centered around the question that, okay, we are trying to understand what kind of future is possible for humanity. What kind of future can we work toward? What is what kind of imagination is possible? It's only by being able to it's only by being able to imagine what's possible can we move in that direction. And that has been the thing uh, that has been erased with all these distortions of the revolutionary figures that we're talking about. Yeah, I just wanted to say that this has been really clarifying to me.
Yeah, I think this whole conversation, like I've also been thinking a lot about the Galileo Galilei like specifically the things thought of. And that in contrast, I think, with Doc, your comments on the panel and Minister Ishmael's comments, which are about like basically the actualization of a people, like a people in movement, like the thinking and the ideological struggle that's required to get there. And I think the problem with like basically like the left or these universities is that the thought that they present is basically a thing, and you don't have to ever question like the assumptions of that thing, like the philosophical assumptions of it, or the world that that thought thing lives in, like the actual consequences of your actions, like taking responsibility for those thoughts. And I think part of it too is like when you were describing the Chinese graduate student who was in platypus, and how basically like through that certain people, like certain Asian people, are coming to know Black people mediated through a white philosophy, and how completely like contrary that is to like Paul Robeson's entire, I think, like method, which is that the peoples of the world can meet each other directly. And there's still some mediation which is required, which is like the language that needs to be understood, that needs to be researched or needs to be developed. But it's like a true kind of mediation rather than like this wall that people keep talking about, like this brick wall of a thing that is just like preventing you from being in between. Yeah, and I just think like all of this stuff, because I think with college too, like with Grace Lee Boggs, I feel like we went into it thinking of Grace basically like maybe as a thing, which is like, yeah, an Asian woman. But then actually what she illuminates is like all of the philosophical assumptions. And I think part of that too is that it's not just what you do, like protesting or like doing an action or asking like what is to be done. But I think it's the question of like what is the quality of human being that you need to aspire to be? Like who are the kinds of people that you want to be, that you see, and that actually move you? Because I feel like part of the way that you were describing, yeah, like Paul Robeson, his relationship to the people, and how people like look up to him and also carry something of Paul Robeson like in themselves, I feel like is just really important. And it's just amazing to me that so much of that just like seemed to have gone over the head of some of these leftists who were the most emboldened to, I guess, ask questions or to almost impress, like, oh, like, why aren't you thinking about this thing? Instead of recognizing the whole, like, all of the different layers of what was involved. And there are a lot of comments. I didn't want to read them because the discussion was so bright. But Todd said good morning. Dylan Pie from Arizona is watching, saying, haven't had the chance for these discussions since I moved from Philly in 2017. Emil, Jacob, Kathy, Blaze, Yvonne, Shade, Pastor Keith, Virginia, Jerome, Virginia AG, a lot of people, and DJ Elf, the official People's Party. And in terms of comments, Shade says, truly, you all did a phenomenal job. There is nothing missed in your work. I'm overwhelmed by how beautiful the event was. The people's reaction was all the proof of Robeson's impact on humanity. And let's see. Dylan says, far too many modern day educators are caught up in the stagnancy of the dogma they were brought up on. And Virginia says, putting misinformation out there is a moral and political crime, which is, yeah, exactly what Doc and everyone was saying. And she adds that some of us, Tony students, collected signatures to get Gus Hall and Jarvis Tyner on the presidential ballot. Then Gus Hall and Angela Davis. What a time. And Jerome says, it seems from what Doc said that some came to this historic event with sinister motives. And let's see. Oh, what I commend the Free School for doing, what most people never do, is taking the time to piece apart the actual substance of the event. And there are a lot of, oh man. Let's see. DJ Elf says, school taught you to make the boss rich and not empower yourself, so you graduate not knowing how to perform tasks in a factory and not how to affect political change. And then Jake is just really emphasizing the Harold Washington quote, that the greatest teacher I had was the men, women, and children of the city, and how important that is. And Todd says, I think perhaps the what is to be done question does reflect the glaring contradictions within the ruling capitalist class and the general feeling of despair. Yes.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
Well, because I feel like the question what is to be done is a pretty broad one and it can be interpreted different ways.
Yeah.
But based off of what we were saying and how people were interpreting the specific asking of it at the event, it's not really about like, oh, like what can I do? But like literally the person admitted to Doc, like I wasn't even asking a genuine question. I was trying to provoke you. And it's also, yeah, the subtext of the question is like not what is to be done, but you guys are not doing anything. What are the actual things that need to be done? And this is something that we came up against a lot when we were reading together at Cornell, those of us who are at Cornell, where people would be like, yeah, this weird thing about like material, like the material world is the only thing that matters, and reading doesn't matter, and ideas don't matter, and the only thing that matters is like the material, the quote unquote concrete. And the thing is that psychologically and sociologically, it is very interesting because while on the one hand, the universities basically condition you to not realize, as many people have been saying, to not realize that you have a responsibility and that not just your actions, but also that your words and ideas have consequences. But at the same time, I think universities and like professors and also these leftist groups, they prey upon the guilt of the college students, especially those who are in, yeah, like the big cities, as Emily was saying, where whether you realize it consciously, you do see that you are part of a problem and that you are separated from the people and that you're part of a life world which is antagonistic to ordinary people. And so these different forces prey upon the guilt of these students and then kind of, you know, distort it into something which is basically, yeah, then you become someone who's like, yeah, like, I don't know, part of PSL or something, where you're trying to assuage your guilt by like being a quote unquote revolutionary, but your whole concept of being what a revolutionary is essentially like trying to meet people's quote unquote material needs. Like that's, but like it's all coming from basically a place of guilt. And yeah, I just feel like what I would hope for anyone who went to the event, but especially younger people, is something that, yeah, like I've learned from the past couple years, especially from being part of free school and this incredible opportunity. And I just feel very fortunate to be part of this group of people and this community. But like, I feel like when we do stuff in free school, like when we do events and like, yeah, like when we like present documentaries and stuff, the primary response that we get from, yeah, especially like older Black people is like, thank you. Thank you for making this information and this knowledge available. It is so important. And that's not like a material, like obviously, yes, people are suffering, and we're not like, nothing that we're doing is saying that people should just ignore the fact that there's lots of suffering out there. But like what we're trying to impart and to contribute towards is the sense of confidence in people that they can solve these problems. And that when you're just doing this thing of like, oh, we need to do like, I don't know, some kind of GoFundMe to like whatever, you know, like it's just like you yourself have not come to terms yet with your own like yeah, basically guilt. And I think the other thing is that when you're in an environment like the Chicago event, like you should take a step back. And this is, yeah, I guess addressing either the platypus person or the PSL person. You should take a step back and actually think about, why does it seem so jarring for me to ask that question? And why was there a response amongst the audience when I asked that question? Where like I thought that I was doing something smart. Like I thought that I was pointing out something that you guys hadn't thought of. Like maybe we have thought about it, but also like you should think about, yeah, like why is it that my question was so out of place? And actually reflect on it and not just, I don't know, like proceed from all of these, yeah, like all of these assumptions that are either rooted in guilt or rooted in a profound sense of irresponsibility, which I guess are kind of tied together. But yeah.
I wanted to express some, I guess, some gratitude at how Brother Abel, student minister, Brother Abel Muhammad, accepted our invitation to attend our celebration of Robeson. So some background, he's a student minister at Mas Mariam, the Nation of Islam headquarters in Chicago, and he's a Mexican from Chicago, and we're working out the Afro-Asiatic reconfiguration of the world, which is to say, we want to draw now that the West is in decline and has dug its own grave. Uh, we are looking for a way out, and we look towards the history, the values, and the struggle of Africa, Asia, and Black America to find new human relations, to find new national, international relations, and uh, to see, I guess, uh, somebody that says, I'm an Asiatic black man, uh, which to me, it means something a lot because I'm of Mexican descent, and to see someone that says I'm in the Black freedom struggle, which is not a struggle that is exclusive to one particular people, but a conception of freedom and a way of viewing the world from the struggle of an enslaved people that has become so wide that you have a conception of freedom that involves all people, and then you can see and see all of the world and become part of it. Uh, well, to me, I'm like, wow, like that's what I want to do. That's what I want to be. Uh, and I can't be the only one. Especially in a place like Chicago, which is a center of struggle, and that has a large Black population, large Mexican Latino population, uh, and I think that also has a history of struggle of these two groups together, seeing their common position in society and their common future. Uh, I think this is something that this country and this world needs, and I'm humbled to say that we have done something, especially our movie team, that uh, these people we respect so much that are leading the struggle feel that we had something to offer, and we too can be in service to the people of Chicago and the people of this country and the people of this world. So yeah, that was beautiful, man. Chicago, it's no joke, man. Chicago's no joke.
I just wanted to add something. Like, I think like since the time I came to America, like I've been struggling to understand like race, like because this is something that's like I don't still think that I feel comfortable, but I think through this event I'm trying to like understand concretely like what you mean by whiteness, because uh in the university, like I think with this whole discussion, I think it was very clear like what okay, I'm trying to coherently say it, but I might fail, but I'll try it again. But you know, the thing that at some point, Du Bois and Robeson both said that we wanted to prove ourselves, like be extraordinary, try everything to prove ourselves, so that we could prove to the world that the black man had something to contribute. And I feel like that's what is, I mean, in a way, the event was laying out Robeson's life like that for people who are not aware of Robeson. I'm not talking about the black community, but people, Asians, immigrants, like who are coming in here. And it was to lay out this man's life and through his example, understand how much of a contribution the black radical tradition had made to the world. And to completely miss that like that is also through the university education, like the kind of blinders they put on you where you subconsciously like have this sense of whiteness which you can't see out of. And yeah, I think it was really evident. And the way like Doc put it, I think that you know like you are disrespecting black people when you say when you ask these questions. So it sort of like makes you feel like black people have nothing to prove to you. You need to get out of your whiteness and walk over to our side.
That's
Yeah,
right.
that's
Are there any more comments?
Let's see. Um, Okay, so yeah, the user commented that their name's actually Jim Engel, and Todd responds, yeah, I'm not trying to contradict those sentiments at all, Jeremiah. I'm reflecting on the broader conditions and contradictions of like the statement itself. And then there's like, it's more of an internal discussion in the comments, but Christopher Romero says, good afternoon from New York. Material conditions are important, but so is the intellectual hunger of the people. Perhaps people want to understand why life has been this way and what is the way forward. And I feel like that's really important. Like the people, not just as like things to be acted upon, which I think is basically the way that PSL or like some of these party people think of it, which is that they have the ideas and then the people just follow. But rather what we're saying, which is that with like the new consciousness of the world, the people as a whole are the revolutionary agents. And that like out of that, like a philosophy for the people of the people has to come out. And that Paul Robeson is like one of, yeah, like a forerunner of the civil rights movement, but also a forerunner of like that example. And then, yeah, I think that's like pretty much the main comments that are responding to our discussion. But yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I know we've talked about this in the past with Du Bois's Black Reconstruction. I feel like I've said it a lot in informal, like casual conversations with all of you, but this is like, I think underneath a lot of Du Bois's work especially is a spoken and unspoken, very firm and determined statement that Du Bois makes over and over and over again, which is he says, do you believe that the ordinary person, that the ordinary man is capable of creating and building civilization? Do you believe that civilizations in the past, music, art, culture, democracy, knowledge, that was created by the ordinary man? And there's just, I feel like to me that permeates a lot of political thought today. Like you can tell whether someone, you actually believe the ordinary person has made history, has made civilization, is the determiner of the future, or whether you don't. And I just wanted to say that because to me, that's what, like, to me, it's very clear that the connection is basically this racist notion that the Black proletariat has not been the main rudder and driver of revolution in this country, of progress in this country, advancing the democratic struggle in this country. That underneath it all is the belief that the ordinary person, no matter where you are in the world, has not been the builder of civilization. And that's Robeson. That's why Robeson is so important. Where Robeson is like in the music, there's something in the music around the world, the folk music, there's something there. It's the capacity of the people to build, to make history, to govern. That's our oneness, the oneness of humanity. And yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to say that. And also, like, the other story I just wanted to share was like a bunch of us, we went to the event early. It was 3 p.m. and the museum, I guess, was about to close. And you could tell the guy at the front desk was a little like, you guys are coming to the museum way too late. You're only going to have 40 minutes to spend in the museum. And we all made the decision to like pay the money to go into the museum for 40 minutes anyways. And I think this guy was kind of judging us low key, where he was like, you guys are gonna we're gonna have to kick you out at 4 p.m., whatever. But then later, when we went to the front to bring in the food and he saw that we were organizing this event, part of the event being organized, like I had brought a bunch of Du Bois hoodies to Chicago, and I had brought enough extras that I was like, I'll just, whoever I see, like maybe I'll just give a hoodie. So I decided to give the guy at the front desk one of the hoodies. And he was so excited, and he looked at the hoodie and he looked at me, he said, the youth are all right after all. He was like, the youth are all right after all. And he smiled and walked away with his hoodie. And that's the thing. That's who we are. Like, the messengers are the message. And it's also this thing of, for me, I feel so deeply that this thing that Doc, you said a few weeks ago, which is the people have always searched for knowledge. The people have always, since the beginning of time, been interested in ideas. What are the spirituals? What is song then? What are the sorrow songs? To make sense of life, to imagine the future, to organize. Like that's folk music, like anywhere you go. And yeah, I just feel so passionate about this point because it's just like, yeah, it's just for me, I just feel this really deep determination. In some ways, this is exactly the deep determination I have coming from a university where I do feel like it taught me the opposite, to look down upon ordinary people, but also look down upon myself. It's why it's so emotional to see that documentary. Like for me, it's like I feel so like personal about China, and to see Zheng Weiwei say like thank you Robeson, like it's so emotional to me. To see that China celebrated his 110th anniversary, birth anniversary, like that moves me. That like for some reason it moves me to tears. Or to see Robeson so unequivocally be like, I congratulate New China, like, and I want to learn your language, I want to learn your song. And then China made the March of the Volunteers the national anthem. Like that gives me so much pride. And you feel a sense of loyalty to a tradition and to a person you never even met. And that's why I was a little disappointed with the person from Platypus, because I was like, bro, like we're people, like you're my people, and I just want to know, like, were you moved too? Like, were you moved too? Because that's us, that's our, like we're the same generation. Like we have work to do, and we have like we're so lucky to have a family that we're loyal to, you know, this human family that Minister Ishmael said. And yeah, that was another point I wanted to say, is like I forgot to say it earlier, but I love the one line I actually really remembered from Minister Ishmael's presentation. Was he made the point that the reason why people have had to try to destroy Robeson is because Robeson encountered and wanted to yell from the rooftops, that he did the truth, which is that the black proletariat belongs with humanity. And I thought that was really profound, because he was like, if you separate the black proletariat from humanity, the human family they belong with, then you succeed in denigrating like humanity's march forward. Then you do succeed in like pushing down the working class, preventing a new future from being born. And I think that was really moving for me to hear, because I feel like that's what we have found in the Nation of Islam. Like just like the documentary, like seeing Robeson sing the Chinese national anthem is really moving for me. Like I've said it before and I'll say it again, which is like, it was very moving to me to hear Minister Rodney Muhammad the first time I ever went to the Nation of Islam. I had no effing idea what I was walking into. And he just said out loud, he was like, you know, people want you to hate Minister Farrakhan just like they want me to hate Mao. And I don't hate Mao. And actually, I love Mao, and I love that man, and I love what his people have done. And yeah, that means everything to me. And yeah, it's I don't know how else to describe it. It's like a very deep human loyalty. Like it's a very deep loyalty to like a tradition that has given me so much. And it can give so many young people everything. I think you're the one who said it, Doc. You're like, in some ways, this is the real theory of everything. Robeson was on the path to discovering the real theory of everything.
But I also wanted to, like, this thing you're saying about human beings with song and art, always that endeavor, aspiring to something. You can say the same thing for science. I mean, what is science if it is not for human beings, if it's not for the ordinary people? Does it have any existence on its own? And that's what Du Bois was saying, that Galileo, having the lie that he told to save his own life and maybe continue 7 extra years of pitiable, I know, whatever, scientific research, it does not, like, when you compare it to the betrayal of his fellow human beings, it does not compare. And I think nowadays, I mean, it's very stark. You're basically, people have tried to separate, divorce science from human beings. So science is its own thing. Science is for science itself. It can have an existence outside of human existence. And I mean, that makes no sense at all, because from the beginning of time it was attached to the movement of peoples. You need knowledge because humanity has to move forward. What else will we do with knowledge? Like, what existence does it have in the abstract?
Yeah, I think sorry. Like there's another thing I was thinking about of this idea of like whether it's Robeson or anyone else that we celebrate of them being a complete human being, because I feel like younger people these days, if you try to talk about someone as a complete person or the complete picture of them, it's usually um, either implicitly or explicitly to just be like, oh, King, the complete picture of King is that he was depressed, or like the complete picture of King is that he had like affairs or whatever. Like that's how they try to spin it. But actually, it's it's such a tragedy because like the way that we have come to understand like King as a complete human being, Robeson as a complete human being is this one, first of all, the striving of every individual person to become a whole person. Like, and I feel like that's been very important just for me as a person, but like also the striving of people to become whole in a broader collective sense and to become complete. And yeah, I think something else I wanted to say is like it's it just made me reflect on like what my mindset was coming out of college and like yeah, like why a lot of us came to free school. But like if I learned anything from the time that we spent reading together at Cornell and like reading Grace Lee Boggs and Du Bois and King and Baldwin was like I don't know who to trust in this world, but like I trust Baldwin. Like I trust James Baldwin. Like, I trust Martin Luther King. Like I trust Du Bois. And it's such a it seemed like in retrospect, maybe at the time it seemed like a small thing, but actually it's yeah, like that's what you stake your life on. But that's also where there's such a difficulty because whether people admit it or not, like young people are yeah conditioned basically to trust ultimately like the white thinkers, and like there's nothing wrong obviously with like being like white and like a I don't know like racial sense, but like this is also where you get this whole thing of oh Robeson could not have been what like we're saying he is. He must have been basically a puppet of Gus Hall or whatever, like, and there must have been some flaw in Robeson or some flaw in Du Bois, and like they were Stalinists, and like yeah, that whole thing. But you're coming at it from basically the perspective of like what someone else has said about Du Bois, what someone else has said about Robeson, and I think the beautiful thing is that, like, just speaking from experience, but I feel like this resonates with a lot of us. But when you actually trust someone, like, genuinely trust, not just intellectually, but also on a moral level, someone like Robeson and the example that they led, yeah, like, you begin to trust yourself more. You trust, like, you trust yourself and the way that you can relate to the world and the way that and the kind of person that you can become, and you trust those experiences, and that leads you become yeah that ultimately I feel like all of us are trying to also become more complete versions of ourselves and people who can actually do good and contribute in a positive way to this world. So yeah, I was just thinking about yeah this idea of like completeness. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess sort of related is when Minister Ismail was talking, he said something which is that when a man, if he only lives for himself, when he's gone, he's gone. But if he lives for something greater than himself, then when he's like physically gone, he's still here with us. And um, there was a segment in the documentary where like Purva had also shared this like ahead of time with Amir Baraka essentially calling out to Du Bois and Robeson that we need them. And I think that's what we're trying to do, which is that they're still here with us. And I guess the other piece that I was going to say is that we live in a time when life seems like almost disposable. And I think, Doc, during the conference you said, which is that when things that are unnatural, such as greed and exploitation, are the rule of law, then violence and murder and chaos become natural things when they're unnatural. And it is really sad that we see both people die, like physically, just out of like very stupid and for no reason at all. But then also like people die just while they're still alive. And I think that's also why I've been thinking a lot about death lately, which is like, what is life and what is death? And I think it's people like Robeson and even Baldwin. I say Baldwin because there's a poster in Michelle's room with Baldwin above the camera. But they teach you, like, in spite of the difficulty and struggles in life, to like live a complete life where, so as long as you contributed your best, that's like beyond, like you can at least be okay with the fact, or truly believe that, like something that Minister Ismail had said, which is that like justice will not forever be asleep. That like what King says, in the long arc of history, or like the moral arc of the history of history bends towards justice. And yeah, I think I've just been reflecting a lot, and it's helpful. Well, one, I've been reflecting a lot about life and death because of everything that's going on around us. But also, like, yeah, I think we're all in free school, like trying to do good. And I think that's what also we're sharing with other people, which is that it is still important. It is important. Mm-hmm.
And I would just say, I mean, you all, your generation is facing a most difficult struggle, way more difficult than for my generation. And Alice, I agree with you. The imminence of death all the time, and where the ruling class of this country can only talk about war. War is the central agenda, even though the people don't want war. And this is, I mean, I feel it completely, and that's why the documentary was so valuable, because it said there is a way out. There is a way out. And I just want to say that I know what Eddie is saying completely, and that's what Minister Abel Muhammad represents: the unity of humanity. That there is no Mexican American separated really from the African American struggle. That's when it really, everything makes sense. Minister Abel Muhammad is no less a Mexican American in the Nation of Islam than he would have been outside of the Nation of Islam, except that his life has a higher and deeper purpose. Am I correct about this? You know what I'm saying? Oh, go ahead, Eddie.
No, completely. Please keep going, dog. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, and you could see it in him. I mean, I just wish everybody could meet him. I hope he comes on June 17th, he and his wife. I mean, just, um, I mean, he is an American in the only way that you can be an American. There are not a lot of options here, but the question is to figure out what is America and what makes me an American in the 21st century. This is a big question. And if you don't like Americans as we think America is, if you don't like them, if you think they are the backwater of world humanity, which a lot of people do, a lot of, and I say leftists, cultural leftists, everything is wrong with the American people. They've done nothing. They're incapable of doing anything really positive. And we keep talking about the Nation of Islam and giving them, all due respect for what they are doing, for what they have done, lifting up the downtrodden. And that's really what they have done. I mean, in the first resurrection and in this resurrection. And, we reached out to Eileen X, also known as Amina Mohammed, the Chinese woman who's a member of the Nation of Islam and community activist in LA, an artist. And we wanted to see if she could come to the June 17th event. She couldn't. But, everyone wants to know, how does a Chinese woman find her way to the Nation of Islam? Which is a question. How does a Mexican American man find his way to the Nation of Islam? What meaning does this have for him? I ask myself, how does Samir find his way to the Church of the Overcomer? What is this? And I can say, I know for African Americans, it is deeply affirming for us when people who we don't think of as being a part of us are part of us. It is really affirming. That's what was going on out at DuSable, the things that people said, Emily, I'm certain he was saying, well, what are these Asians? Oh, well, they're taking, And then, as you all were setting up, and you gave him this hoodie. I mean, you don't realize that these small acts of kindness across the divisions that are artificial mean so much. And, for Minister Abel Mohammed to have such deep trust, I would say, I'll put it this way, in Afro-America and our struggle and our suffering, you don't cross the divisions that are so artificial. And I hope that he can come. I hope that Amina Mohammed can come at some point. I know Minister Ishmael would like to come, and I'm going to call him and make sure and see if he can come on the 17th. But the idea of a new people being born, you can only understand this. I think I can only understand it when one is connected to the people. Once you're connected to our people, then all philosophies and theories can be fit in to the historical empirical reality that we live. But I agree with everybody. It begins with the people. And then we see that the people are so much alike. That's Robeson. You know, I want to hang out more with Alice and them up in Chinatown. You know, with Sister Mina out in LA and the gangs and Chinese thugs and all of that. I want to get down with them. What are they thinking? All of this is the great material that confirms that humanity has a future in spite of the great dangers of this ruling class. It's these are emotional times. I mean, to put it mildly. Yeah, I mean, anybody could break down weeping and crying at the drop of a hat because everything is so sensitive and so emotional. That's all I have to say.
Yeah.